Hi, everyone. My name is Matthew Calvert. Today, I'm going to be playing the interviewer. I am a former BCG consultant. I'm currently a senior director at Insight, a climate technology company, and I'm here with Tessa.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tessa, and I'm going to be playing the part of the interviewee today. I was previously an associate consultant and a senior associate consultant at Bain, and I'm also working in the climate tech sector at Material Evolution as the chief of staff.
Awesome. Today is, as I said, an interviewer-led case. We're going to be doing Pedals of Progress, and this case is about bike infrastructure ahead of the 2024 Olympics. For context, we are going to be assuming that the Paris Olympics have not happened yet. With that, Tessa, are you ready to get started?
Absolutely excited for it.
Great. The city of Paris is preparing for the upcoming Olympics and is considering installing many kilometers of new bike lanes to support increased tourism during the Games. The city council wants to understand the costs and benefits of the installation and ultimately decide on the correct level of investment. Your firm has been brought in to help organize the project and make a recommendation to the city for the scale of the installation. How would you proceed?
Great. Thanks so much for this. The Olympics is always such a fun and exciting time to watch on TV. So I'm excited to sort of be involved from the consultant level. Just to clarify what this case is about, we're sort of looking at whether the city of Paris should install bike lane infrastructure ahead of the Paris Olympics, and what the cost and benefits and level of investment required would be for that. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Great. And you mentioned that the goal of the bike lanes is to sort of support increased tourism. Are you able to further clarify what the goal of this consulting case is? What are we sort of optimizing for or trying to maximize?
Good question. So the city has two goals. First, it wants to move millions of tourists as efficiently as possible during the 2 weeks that the games take place. Second, it wants to continue the city and the country's trajectory towards a lower carbon future in which mass transportation and biking is centered over car travel. During a recent council meeting, a member highlighted that cities like Amsterdam have seen positive impacts from robust biking infrastructure.
Super cool. Yeah, love that. And are you able to give any more information in terms of the timeline? So, sort of where are we at the point that the case is occurring, and how long do we have before the Olympics to get this done?
Yeah, let's assume that the Olympics are 4 years away, so there's plenty of time for new construction.
Perfect. And then what is the budget that the city of Paris has set for this project?
So the budget for the project is under debate. There are multiple options for possible investment, including lane type, total number of kilometers constructed. The city is waiting to see the results of your firm's work and the costs and benefits before committing to a budget.
Perfect. So it sounds like part of this case is to sort of make it a recommendation on what the budget would need to be.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Well, if you don't mind, I'd love to take a minute and put together a bit of a framework.
Go for it.
Okay, I'm good to get going if you are.
Yeah.
Perfect. So there are three main buckets that I'd love to explore as part of this case. The first one is the profitability framework and to really look at the financials of the case. And as part of that, I'd like to first look at the costs. So what would be involved as the maybe fixed costs to sort of set up the bike lanes, and what would be involved as the variable costs that would be ongoing costs to maintain the bike lanes and to make sure that they're sort of staying up to date. That's the first bucket, the financial bucket. The second one is the qualitative bucket. So here I'd like to just understand, like, qualitatively, what are the benefits and maybe disadvantages of bike lanes versus other forms of infrastructure. So let's say you mentioned a couple of them in the prompt, just regarding a lower carbon future, maybe tourist mobility, both in the Olympics, but also after the Olympics, environmental benefits, health benefits, and the safety of bike riding. So I think one potential con could be, is it really safe to have people biking beside cars? What is the level of safety for that? What would the health implications be? And then the third bucket would be sort of an implementation bucket. So what does it actually take to implement bike lane infrastructure? What is the area of scope that we would need to cover? The city of Paris, I think there's like the main city that you think of when you go to Paris as a tourist, but obviously it spans out. There's lots of people living in lots of different areas. So what are we thinking of in terms of the distance or the radius for this type of project? And how could we sort of minimize as the implementation is rolling out? How could we minimize the disruption? We don't want to have to close down major streets that people are transporting to and from work on. So just sort of thinking about what the implementation implications are. And those would be the three main buckets to explore. I would say that I would start by trying to understand what the various options for bike infrastructure might be, maybe by looking at some of those comparable cities that you mentioned, like Amsterdam, and what they've implemented.
Great. That's a really solid framework. I do have an exhibit here. So as part of your firm's work, the following two exhibits have been developed. What are the implications for the city of Paris?
Great. So I can see that there are two charts here. Oh, sorry, I'm just gonna, perfect. So in terms of the first chart, I would say that here we're sort of double clicking on different modes of transportation. So along the top, you can see there are different types of modes of transportation. And then along the side, we can see there are sort of two main criteria here. The first one is the time that it takes, and the second one is the number of people who are being moved. So as we sort of look along here, we can see that overall, there's a bit of a trade-off here between, how long it takes to travel versus how many people are being moved with each mode of transportation. The bike lanes, sidewalks, they look like they can move the highest volumes of people. And overall, we're sacrificing capacity for speed, except for in the case of public transportation. It looks like in public transportation here with the subway / metro, we can see that the average time is actually quite low to travel 10 kilometers. It's only 24 minutes, whereas the maximum capacity is actually the highest. So that's probably the one sort of area here where you don't have to sacrifice capacity for speed. And then if we look below, I saw that you had another chart there. So it looks like here we're sort of double clicking on the various methods of bike lanes, the bike lane infrastructure options. So that first chart looks like it's a zoom out, and this one's a little bit of a zoom in on that one particular type of transportation that we're looking at. And here we're looking at a trade-off between cost, safety rating, and bike volume, it looks like. So those are the three criteria being measured. So it's really, really interesting because just from no bike lane infrastructure to painted lines, you can see there's 5 times more people and 20 times more people actually from no bike infrastructure to plastic bollards. So you can see as we go up here, like we're rapidly increasing the number of people who are able to be transported via a bike. The other interesting thing here is construction cost per kilometer increases slowly in the first few options, while the bike volume actually looks like it increases rapidly. So the construction cost doesn't increase as quickly, but the bike volume increases more. So we can see there's a bigger benefit to paying more by getting a greater bike safety, which is really, really interesting and will be important for us to think about in that qualitative section. So the implications here, I would say there are 2 main implications. The first is more expensive bike infrastructure obviously is safer and sees higher ridership. And the second one is that moving from no bike lane to a bollard protected bike lane will increase ridership by 20x. So that's like a huge jump that we're able to see just from going from nothing to that one type. And then one option that's really jumping out to me in terms of what a hypothesis could be here is that we don't actually have to choose just one of these particular options. Maybe the best thing to do, especially as we're thinking about like these different radiuses of the metropolitan area of Paris and then farther out where it might be a little bit more suburban, we can think about having like the slightly more expensive, safer, sort of type of infrastructure in the middle. And then as we go out, having a little bit different types and sort of exploring a bit of a mix there.
Yeah, well, thank you for walking me through all of that. So your firm is closing in on 3 distinct project scopes. They're thinking about 50 kilometers, of bike lanes, 100 kilometers of bike lanes, and 200 kilometers of new bike lanes. Can you estimate the likely costs for each project?
I think we're back.
Okay, sorry about that. So your firm is closing in on three distinct projects: 50, 100, and 200 kilometers of new bike lanes. Estimate the likely costs of each project.
Okay. So, and I think that on that last chart there,
Yep.
you had given me some of those figures. So let me just sort of compare those numbers. So to play back, we're looking at 50 kilometers, 100 kilometers, and 200 kilometers. So what
Mhm.
I'd say here, obviously we have these construction costs here, and they range quite significantly in terms of what the total is going to be. So what I'll do is try and find maybe like a lower bound of what we would look for if we were saying one of the cheaper points of infrastructure, so the painted lanes for 50 kilometers, and then maybe also an upper bound. So say for the 200 kilometers, if we had the most expensive, the two-way separated cycle tracks, what the difference would be. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a bit of a chart, and I'm going to have all of the different kilometer options that you've just given there, those three different options along the top. So I'll have a 50 kilometer, a 100, and a 200 kilometer. And then along the side, I'll have sort of that lower bound of the painted lanes that are 5,000 euros per kilometer. And then I'll have an upper bound, which is that 250,000 per kilometer. So then in the lower bound, we can see if we multiply the 50 kilometers by the 5,000 euros, that's 250,000 euros. To get to the 100 kilometers, I would just double that figure and I'd get to 500,000 euros. And then to get to 200 kilometers, I'd double the figure again. And I would get to 1 million euros there in total. So we can see for the lower bound, for the painted lanes, we would have for 50 kilometers, 250K, and for 200 kilometers, 1 million. And then if we look at the upper bound, we'll do the exact same calculation. We'll just take the 250,000 per kilometer. So 250,000 times 50 kilometers, that'll be 12.5 million euros. Again, just double that for 100 kilometers, which is 25 million euros. And then for 200 kilometers, double it one last time for 50 million. And if I just sort of show that to you here, I'm not sure if you can see it. I'll try and zoom in as much as I can.
Yeah.
But basically we have those various calculations, and we can see that depending on the distance and depending on which type of infrastructure, will go anywhere between 250,000 to 50 million. The main implication there being, of course, there's quite a significant range for each option and depending on what we're going to pursue. But again, I'll just like say once again, it doesn't necessarily need to be an all or nothing type of situation where we're either doing the cheapest option or the most expensive option. It might be better if we just sort of split it into different quarters or zones for each type of infrastructure to use. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's great. Just putting some of these numbers in context, you said for 200 kilometers, the upper bound is 50 million euros. How do you feel like this compares to what you think the Olympics, what is spent on the Olympics overall?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think that the Olympics would be multiple billions of dollars in infrastructure spending to actually put a new Olympics on. There would be new stadiums that need to be built. There's probably just so much spend that needs to be done for an Olympics. I know I live in London, and I know like the Olympics I think was in 2012 here in London, and still there's like infrastructure everywhere that was, oh, this was built for the Olympics, this was built for the Olympics. So I'm sure that would be the same in Paris. And overall 50 million seems like quite a small amount of money to be investing.
Yeah. And bike lanes are always going to be used compared to some of the stadiums and I know Rio and London that are hardly used after the Olympics. Interesting. Um, so the firm has identified one route in particular for further study. There exists a 10-kilometer route from the city center to the proposed swimming venue. Under one proposal, the city would put in the most expensive separated bike lanes possible, costing 250,000 euros per kilometer. Under a competing proposal, no new bike infrastructure would need to be built, but a 2,000 car parking lot would be built at the location of the venue, costing 500 euros per parking spot to construct. For this specific section of the project, what would you recommend?
Great question. So it sounds like we've sort of narrowed into two options for this specific portion. The
Hmm.
one is the most expensive bike lanes, and the second one is actually a parking lot.
Yep.
So if we look at the most expensive bike lanes, we have 10 kilometers of bike lane. I'm just going to write that down. 10 kilometers bike lane times 250,000 euros per kilometer. So the total for that is going to equal 2.5 million euros. And that's for option one. And then option two, we have the parking lots. So we have 2,000 car spots. And we're going to multiply that by 500 euros per car, which is going to be 1 million. So we can see that the sort of comparison that we have here between option one and option two, we have a 2.5 million and we have a 1 million. And so what I would say here is option two, which is the parking lot, is actually, it is less expensive than
Hmm.
bike lanes. However, if we look at those 2,000 car spots versus the number of people who are able to be actually transported on the bike lanes, we know that there's a lot more people who will be able to get from point A to point B in the bike lanes than 2,000 people. So I would still say that even though it's cheaper, it probably still is not the best option. It's not all about the cost here. And I would say if we think back to that original framework that we were thinking about, there was the environmental, there was the mobility, there were the health, and there were the space implications. And if we think about all of those, I think just sort of thinking out loud and I'm thinking from a first principles mindset that those types of things would be much preferred in option one than option two. So I would still recommend the expensive bike lanes get installed over the parking lot.
Great. Finally, Tessa, what is your recommendation to the city of Paris on the correct investment level in bike infrastructure in the run up to the Olympic Games?
Of course. Would you mind if I just take a minute to sort of structure my thoughts there? We've talked about a
Absolutely.
number of different elements today.
Yep.
Okay, great. So if we think back at sort of the goal at the beginning of the case, we were talking about the Paris Olympics, and our goal as consultants was really to size the investment in bike lane infrastructure that would be required. And the city of Paris sort of, I would recommend that they proceed with implementing the full 200 kilometers of bike lane infrastructure, not the 100 that we ended up looking at, just because it really does seem like such a small investment in the overall infrastructure budget for the Paris Olympics. And also it will have long lasting effects on tourism and residents of the city of Paris. I would recommend that there's a zoned system that's used in order to implement the bike lane infrastructure. So instead of just going all for the most expensive or all for the least expensive, let's really think and sort of do a further analysis on which zones would have which types of infrastructure. And then the main risks I would say would be the disruption to implement and the safety for people while riding. So there still are a number of sort of bike accidents that happen. It's especially when there are cars and bikes on the same road. So just sort of thinking about how to make that as safe as possible, whether it be public education campaigns for drivers to understand how to be safer drivers with bikes beside them or whatnot, but just sort of reducing that risk. And as the next steps, I would say we would want to finalize a detailed design and timeline to ensure that the construction is completed in time for the Olympics. It would really be a shame if this was one of the many construction projects that gets delayed and isn't there in time for the Olympics. And also securing permits and sort of really getting started on initiating the construction.
Awesome. Well, Tessa, thank you so much for helping us with this case.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Hey everyone, it's Kenton Kavesti here, the founder of Rocket Blocks. Thank you so much for watching this mock interview video. I hope you found it informative and helpful as you are getting ready to prepare for your own interviews and hopefully landing that job offer you are excited about. We have a ton of great content on the Rocket Blocks channel coming out on a weekly basis, mock interviews, mini lessons, and chats with our Rocket Blocks experts. So if you haven't subscribed yet already, please do so. There is a big red button below. And if you hit that, you'll get all of our content as soon as it comes out. Thanks for watching and have a great day.